I will take it away. Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sex Over 60. That's what we named it, and we're sticking to it. Talking about human sexuality and intimacy today with Dr. Gayle Doll. And Dr. Doll is Associate Professor Emeritus from K-State University, although her signature line says retired gerontologist. Although she just told me that she feels, ironically, more qualified to talk about sexuality and aging now than she ever did before. So we're glad that she joined us. She is also an aspiring painter, and you can see one of her new works behind her. It's a work in progress, but I thought, gosh, that's pretty good for a retirement pastime, but she can maybe tell you more about that. We knew that there would be varying levels of comfort with the subject matter in the group. And I will tell you that this will be my first sexuality class of any kind in my life, and I'm 66 years old. Kathleen and I have been talking, we were sort of raised similarly and educated similarly. I was unable to take Dennis Daly's course on human sexuality at KU. God knows I tried. I, just tried to sign up every semester, but those classes were filled. But I'm one of many baby boomers who saw the film in 5th grade. And I looked up to see just what that film was called, because where I went to school at St. Anne's in Prairie Village, there was a very secret letter that went home in 5th grade, and you were supposed to put it directly into the hands of your mother. And she was to open it and arrange, or you were invited basically to come after school under the cover of darkness with nuns patrolling the parking lot and closing the blinds so the boys wouldn't peek in, mother-daughter event to watch this movie. And I started thinking, what was that movie called? And I found this wonderful little write-up just today online that I'm going to read to you from a person who attended the same film in 1965. She said, that day, my class was divided by gender. The boys went to the gym where they discussed puberty for a short while and then played Capture the Flag. The girls went to the theater where we watched The Story of Menstruation. The film explained the advent of menstruation and was framed by a narrative of a pubescent girl's happy dreams of going on dates, having a wedding, and caring for a baby, the life trajectory that menstruation was supposed to set in motion. The protagonist of this story was a girl with a large head and puny body, much like the Tinkerbell character from Walt Disney's Peter Pan. The film was distributed for free around the world for over 35 years and was viewed by more than 105 million girls. So it was made in 1946. So that was a little trip down memory lane. I just thought to set that, knowing that we're all baby boomers. And so this is just a real treat to hear from a leading expert really in the country. And with that, I think I'll just ask Dr. Doll to take it away. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, I want to thank you and Kathleen for inviting me. And I want to make a comment about something you said in the introduction. You said that I feel more qualified than ever to talk about sexuality and aging. Well, that's because I'm old, not necessary. I don't want y'all thinking about my racy sex life throughout the rest of the presentation. So I am happy to be with you. As many of you may know, my husband, Rick Dole, was a superintendent of schools in Lawrence for a number of years. And we love Lawrence. We love to be back there. And so I enjoy being a part of this little group today. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what you're going to get throughout this class or whatever. First of all, we're going to talk about aging bias because of the biases about aging, we have certain ideas about what sexuality should look like for older adults. And so I want to address those right off the bat. We're going to be defining intimacy and sexuality because both of these are important for older adults and are very, very different and make people feel comfortable or uncomfortable. We're going to talk a little bit about survey data, we haven't known a lot about sexuality and aging until fairly recently because nobody was maybe strong enough to ask questions about older adults. And now we do actually have quite a bit of survey data talking about what people do, what they want to do. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about historical differences and cohort differences. And Kathy just alluded to this in terms of what kind of sex education each of us had. And finally, we're going to end with some sexual health. And so we're going to start off with a little video first. So Kathleen, you can kick that in and start sharing your screen. And we're going to go straight to this video. It's 5 minutes long, and I've used it for years to get people to feel a little bit comfortable with this material. And what you will need to do is probably crank up your volume. We practiced a little bit early on and found that it's kind of quiet. So get your ear real close to your screen, and Kathleen, go ahead and turn it on.
Okay.
Do you want?
Wait, can you hear that?
The most romantic
Yeah.
thing is the moment when I ask her, do you want to go to bed with me?
The first time I said no.
So a few days later, I asked her again, and she agreed. This was the most romantic, wasn't it? The most romantic thing. My name is David Gallo.
My name is Ruth Cooper, and my age is 79.
I was born in 1980.
My age is 92.
My name is Sunga Greisman Rubin, and I'm 84, going on 85.
How old am I?
Well, I truly believe you stay young because of sex.
At 18, we just wanted a sex object. At 75, you may still want sex. You're not sure you're going to get it, but you're looking for comfort.
I've always wanted romance in my life. Really love, and I think you need it all your life. You need it all your life. You need to be touched. You need to be felt. You need to be hugged. You need to be kissed.
Companionship is very important.
So we cover it up with, well, I don't need men in my life, and I'm past my desires. Baloney. I don't think you ever get past your sexual desires.
I adore it, and I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah, he doesn't look it. He's a very sensual man.
Very.
Listen, I've had so many boyfriends, I can't even count them on my fingers and toes.
Most of the men my age or better are either dead, looking for a nurse or a purse, or sick.
I'm short, reserved, self-conscious, eager to please. I'm compassionate, a good listener.
I used to always look for good-looking men and good dancers. That's what counted. And dress well. Oh, God forbid they shouldn't dress well.
She would be a non-smoker.
Yes, pretty, beautiful also.
He has to have his shit together.
Kindness, consideration.
Sparkle in their eyes.
That tips well.
And no Republicans, please.
But there is something about a senior citizen community that you realize that you are mortal, You see too many people around you, and you know that someday you're going to say bye-bye too.
Unfortunately, I've outlived just about every one of my friends.
At this age, there isn't much time for independence. You think there's just a few years left, and you want to do as much as possible togetherness.
When my husband died, he was 52. I took off my wedding ring, and I said to myself, I wonder what's around the corner for me. And I think instead of sitting and saying, oh, he died, I always looked forward.
The person in my age who has the capacity of doing sex. This is the highest thing in the world, the greatest achievement in the world. And the pleasure is unbelievable.
This business of saying a man uses a woman for a one-nighter, what about a woman using a man? Is that terrible? Kushmir and Tochasarai. You know what that means? I hate to tell you. Kiss my you-know-what.
Okay, Kathleen, I'll let you share the screen again. Yeah, I wanted you to see that because what it does is normalize sexuality for older adults. It was in cartoon form, we believe, because it makes people feel so much more comfortable. Instead of seeing the real people, I wanted to see you to see that those comments were made by real people. It also talks to us about the range of intimacy and sexuality that older people themselves see. I think that there's a huge gender difference in this, in that it felt like the men were eager for companionship. The women were more likely to have romantic flings because they needed something different in their lives as they aged. But I wanted to start with that. If any of you have any questions, please be sure to ask throughout. But as we move forward, I want to talk a little bit about bias and why we have to have films like that to make us feel comfortable about sexuality and aging. So briefly, we think about aging. There's 4 ways that older adults age and that we measure. And one of them is chronological age. And that never really relates well to older adults. Because if you remember your grandparents, you may have had one grandmother that at 60 years old seemed like she was 30, and the other grandmother who at 60 seemed like she was 80. So chronological age really doesn't tell you anything at all. Please go forward, Kathleen. Really, one of the factors because why it doesn't make any sense to study chronologically is because of your psychological age. When you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, geez, I think I'm 39, that's your psychological age. That's how you feel about yourself. And it affects biological age, which is the next slide. Biological age is actually the number of years you have left to live. And this is related to a number of factors, only 30 to 40% of which are heredity. So if you have old-lived parents, you will benefit from that, but most of it is environmental and under your own control. So things like whether you're wearing a helmet or whether you buckle your seatbelt, if you exercise and control your weight, these are all things that you can control and have a lot to do with how long you will live. So the last one that I think is the most important is social age. And social age is what others tell us we are at our age. And this is very, 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 very powerful at our age as we get older than maybe any other time. It's characterized by the birthday cards that we get. And the next 3 slides that we show are going to be some of those birthday cards that you might find. They characterize different myths of aging. And this one is about getting sick. Obviously, can I buy a bowel would not be something that a young person would ask, or it wouldn't be funny. All old people are grumpy is the one here. And most of young people tend to think that old people are incontinent, have constipation. So no wonder they think that old people might be grumpy. And this is something that we see a lot on the evening news at night. And the final one actually emphasizes 2 separate myths of aging. And one, of course, is memory. We all think that we're going to lose our memory, but the other is that older people even think about sex. As you can imagine, if this was just 2 young people in this picture, it wouldn't be funny at all, but it's funny to all of us. I think we have to make fun a little bit to make ourselves feel comfortable. Next slide is about the beginning of intimacy and how we want to define that. I like to call many of my talks intimacy and aging, mostly because a lot of people feel more comfortable with it. I have some 85-year-old friends who really object to me calling my conversations sexuality and aging because they equate it to sexual intercourse. And of course, as people get older, this changes a lot. She suggests that people in their 60s and 70s have a very, very different idea about what they think sexuality and intimacy is than people who are in their 80s and 90s. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we progress. I do want to before we move forward, state that I have sort of a heterosexual bias just because it's what I grew up with. I won't be specifically talking about LGBTQ folks, but it applies to them as well, just about everything that I'm going to be talking about. So let's move forward to the next one. And let's talk about it's possible to have intimate relationships that are non-romantic. So when we talk about people not having spouses anymore, and of course that's much more frequent for women than it is for men, women are less likely to remarry. And part of that is because they have created intimate relationships among friends. I was friends with a group of women that called themselves the Tuesday Ladies. When they were in retirement, they were at a party one night and said, "Hey, Tuesday, let's go do something together." And at first they started calling it an educational trip, but they soon found out that if they went to the small towns in Kansas and went to a bar, the farmers would buy them drinks. And so they went every Tuesday. I interviewed them several times throughout the time that I knew them. And one of the last times I met them, some of their husbands had died. And I asked them if they missed intimacy, if they missed the relationships that they had with their husbands. And every single one of them said no. But then they thought about it a second and they said, you know, but we really find ways to manufacture hugs. So they would ask people for hugs because that part of intimacy never goes away. In fact, in nursing homes, we see that a lack of touch is debilitating to most people, similar to when infants are not touched. And so intimacy is very, very important. And then let's talk a little bit about sexuality. This is probably something you would have gotten in that class, Kathy, if you had gone to it. Because this is a figure that was created by a woman who wrote a sexuality book who taught sexuality here at K-State. She suggests that there's 3 dimensions of sexuality. And these actually researchers have added some dimensions to these or flavors to them after people get older. So in biology, the biological part, it's definitely affected by the illnesses that are more likely to happen as people get older and the treatments to them. So your sexuality takes a hit. I recently had a conversation with a group of people who are early onset Parkinson's, and Parkinson's and many other diseases can really, really change the way you see your own sexuality. So also under psychosocial and psychosexual, we see some changes, including the availability of a partner. So, you know, for many people, as we look at some of the survey research that comes later, you'll see that many people really want to have sex, but they really don't have the person to enjoy that with. It's also affected by the length and quality of your relationship. And for men, age, importance of sex to the person, and the amount of education that they have are all factors that play into how a person views their own sexuality. I might say that sexuality for me is really a part of your personality. So, you know, older women in nursing homes that are still going to get their hair done, and it's because they want to be attractive. So that's part of what you represent to the world in terms of how you view yourself as an attractive or sexual being. And so that doesn't really go away, even though you say that you may have little or no interest in sexuality. So attitudes is really a greater influence than any biometrical factor. So I'm going to go swiftly over these next two. You can just take a look at them, but I'll just tell you that these surveys were done to find out what older people were doing. Because in the 50s, we only had one sexual study. It was done by Kinsey. And he did it in gay bars with people who were only 50 years old. And they suggested that this is what older adults were doing. More recently, these are since 2000, we found out that people really are still having sex well into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. You can skip ahead to the next slide. And this is sort of a repeat of all that. People remain sexually active well into their older adult years. And then one more. And this is a more recent study, but they're all kind of saying the same thing. What I want to point out here is the last bullet. And this is something that's new for me. I had not seen this before, but take a look at this. 17% of older adults in this national study report speaking to a healthcare professional about sexual health in the past 2 years. And 60% of those initiated the conversation themselves. And 40%, 40% of those were initiated by, and only 40% of the 17% were initiated by the healthcare professional themselves, which means of all of us over 60 who are going to a doctor, less than 10% of us have ever had a doctor say to us, what about your sexual health? Do you have any questions? Are you satisfied with what's going on? How can I help? So this represents a bias in our healthcare industry. Either they think that we're not interested, or they're too ashamed or embarrassed to be able to ask these questions. So I guess I'm here to say that you're going to have to be the initiator if you're having any problems related to your sexual health or your sexual life. And don't be afraid of it, because doctors need to recognize that this is an important part of our health and well-being. So I'm going to come back to that report in just a little bit. But let's move on just to the next part, which I think is kind of fun. So our perspectives on older adult sexuality are, again, shaped by the years we were born. So I put together this slideshow some years ago, and I did it at work. And I remember being a little concerned that I was on erotica websites looking for pictures and what K-State was going to do to me. But apparently enough of us at K-State were doing that kind of thing, and I didn't get caught. So let's move forward. This, of course, isn't terribly erotic, but it draws to mind that at the turn of the century, things like playing cards and makeup and dancing and suggestive clothing were frowned upon. And all activities, including learning about sex in 5th grade, were separated so that the sexes didn't get together. This is women in swim clothing, and this is what they had to wear. It was considered risque because you can see that their ankles are showing, but probably was more of a risk to drowning because of the clothing. Move to the next. And this, parents really didn't want to have to tell their kids about sex, so they would buy 2 animals that were of opposite sex and hope that they would procreate so that the kids would kind of learn indirectly. And I never thought that I would get an example of this, but I had a conversation with my parents. I knew far too much about their sex life, but once I became a sex expert, I learned a lot more, including the time when my dad took me out on his little pond in a rowboat and said, our sex life just isn't what it used to be. And well, you know, you're just going to have that conversation. But this was a different conversation. I asked my parents what they knew about sex before they got married. And my mom said, not a thing. My mother didn't tell me anything. And I said, well, what about you, Dad? And my dad said, well, I was raised on a farm. I knew everything. And then my mom said, well, that answers a lot of questions. And of course, that gave me a visual that I wasn't really excited to have, but it's true. People did hope that having animals around would do the job for them and they wouldn't have to provide education. Moving on. This is what people used to wear when they were pregnant. So you wore something that was really, really loose, and so it barely showed. But of course, that isn't true today. People wear very, very tight clothing, so you know exactly where that baby bump is. I entitled this "The Rabbit Died," and I'm guessing that most of you know what that means, because we did not want to say she's pregnant. We would say the rabbit died. Now, in the old days, apparently, a woman's urine was injected into a rabbit, and if the rabbit died, she was pregnant. Well, now we know that all the rabbits died and that it just wasn't a very nice thing to do to them. But I'm using this slide to show that being pregnant was something that was, you didn't even go out in public when you were beyond 6 months pregnant, because people would be thinking about what you did to get in that position. Moving on. And then there was Queen Victoria, who just told the women, lie back and think of England. So in our parents' era, and maybe even for some of us, we were told that sex was for men and that men enjoyed it, and it was a gift we women gave them. Back to the Tuesday ladies again, I asked them what they knew about sex before they got married, and all of them said nothing. One of them said that she dated a guy who she knew had had sex with someone else, and she asked him about it. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be over in 5 minutes." So even boyfriends of their era were under the misconception that it was going to be good for them, but there was no way that it was good for women. Well, as you can imagine, if you were a woman who enjoyed sex back then, you would have been thinking about yourself as being a deviant, like, oh my God, I'm not supposed to like this. What's wrong with me? And so this was a prevalent thought for many, many generations. And it's only been more recently that women have been liberated into understanding that sex and sexual relationships can be very pleasant for them as well. Next slide. So in contrast, as Kathy kind of introduced us earlier, we people in the 60s and 70s had some sex education. At least we had TV, so you could see relationships. But, you know, menstruation in class in 5th grade and your mother asking you if you had any questions, which happened to me as well. And of course, I didn't want to ask any questions because then she would realize that I already was having sex. And so, so these kind of things were problematic, but baby boomer changes and attitude changes really affected the way sexuality for younger people has come about. So we had contraception. So it was the first time that sex was about having fun more than it was procreation. This theories about divorce thing, I think it's kind of interesting. I throw this in here because I love this theory and I don't even know if it fits, but I once read that divorces have increased because life expectancy has increased. So you used to look across the table at your husband and say, oh my God, I can hardly stand you, but you're probably going to be dead in the next 5 years, so I'll stick with you. But now when people look across the table and think, I could be married to this person for 70 years, they get out of these relationships. And so there are more people of our ages that are divorced because of life expectancy, because of mores have changed. And so people find divorce more acceptable. So that means that there are more single people out there, single people trying maybe different ways of expressing their sexuality. There's some gender differences in second marriages and relationships. As I alluded to before, women experience a lot of intimate relationships with other friends and may be interested in meeting people for a few dates, but not necessarily be married to them for the rest of their lives. Men, however, do not have the same number of intimate relationships and are more likely to remarry much quicker because they feel the need for a closeness. We do have better education and media influences. So we can move on. One of the things that we have seen that leads us to believe that there are more older adults having sex is increases in STDs. And this has become pretty obvious in Florida, where, you know, for a while there was some alarmist reportings about, oh, it's doubled. Well, you know, rates were really, really low. And so a doubled really, really low rate is still relatively low, but there are some alarming things that are happening. And one is people are not using safe sex when they get older. Women past menopause can't get pregnant, so they don't think about it. The introduction of erectile dysfunction drugs has increased STDs more than anything else. So apparently men are just excited to get out there again. More divorces and people with better health. People weren't paying attention to safe sex. Back when we were talking about HIV all the time, there were lots of commercials, but people who were in relationships that were monogamous, they weren't paying attention because they didn't think they had to. And so they no longer need them. Men sometimes still make all the decisions related to sex, and so they have the power. But the last one is one that is very, very disturbing. And so you can imagine that there's a Harriet out there that says, you know, George, I won't make you wear a condom, and you know Sophia will. So you ought to go out with me. And so we're hearing that that's one of the reasons that people are increasing in STDs. I want to make sure that people are having the chance to ask questions if you want to. I'm going to go into the sexual health thing and maybe talk briefly about the effects. My interest is maybe on when people have dementia and how that affects sexual relationship between monogamous couple. But with sexual health, I think it's important to note that these changes that we're going to go through really can lead to a more creative sex life. I hadn't really been thinking about this a lot, but in January, some of you may have caught that the New York Times magazine that comes out on Sundays did an article on the joys and challenges of sex after 70. And I was interviewed for the article, so you'll find my name in it. But the person that did this, I know she worked for at least 2 years on it. And I listened to her podcast. It was wonderful. I learned some things that I didn't know. But the one thing that I think she did such a good job talking about was when you get older, it gives you the opportunities to think about sex in different ways. We get stuck in a rut. We do what we think we should, and it works, you know, and that's all right. But as you get older and things change, it gives you the opportunity to say, hey, look, you know, let's try something else because maybe this will be more pleasant. Anyway, these are the things that we need to talk about in terms of what happens to your body. So this is not my expertise. I have read a lot about it, but I certainly am not an OBGYN or a person who has a medical degree. But there is a loss of vaginal elasticity and decreased vaginal lubrication. Now, I'm here to tell you that the things on this list are things that have remediation. There are things that you can do to make this better. You have a slowed response time, and that has been typical for women throughout their lifespan. It's that men are a little bit quicker than we are. And so this is not a big change. But this is the next one that I love, capable of achieving intense and multiple orgasms. And this may be because we're more likely to ask for what we want or to give in to pleasure rather than to hold back. So I love that this is on the list. And it may be easier to enjoy because you don't have to worry about birth control. You don't have to worry about having another baby that you don't want to have. I like this also. Attitudes about sex, personal values, and accessibility of partners is more predictive of sexual activity than any of these biological factors. So people may slow down, decide that they don't want to have sex. I love this story is that I want you all to know that while I'm talking about this, it's unique to each person. So you may not have sexual intercourse, but you may have lots of hugging, you may have petting sessions, you may have all of these kind of things. And I want you to know that there's no one way that's normal. In fact, there was one woman who was asked to rate her sex life on a scale of 1 to 10. And she said, well, I haven't had sex since 1979 and I haven't missed it a bit, so I'd give it a 10. So she was totally happy with the way she was. And I wouldn't want anybody to go away from this presentation thinking, oh my God, I'm not really interested in all that. Does that make me wrong or whatever? So let's talk about men. So it may be hard for men to appreciate these changes, but for women, many times the changes in men are positives for females. So obviously not the reduction in desire, although that could be related to many factors, some health factors, some other things. Less firm erections and a delay in achieving an erection. And as we all know, there are medications for that. And there are lots of different things that you can do to reduce any problems associated with these. There's a decrease in penile sensitivity and a delayed orgasm. So the delayed orgasm means that your sexual activity can last a bit longer than it had in the past. And for some, that's a very good thing. Again, the sexual changes in men, for many of them, erectile dysfunction drugs have been a blessing. For others, they have been content to say, well, that's a part of my life that I don't really need anymore. All right, moving on. Okay, so let's go back to thinking about that earlier slide about conversations about sex with healthcare providers. While studies show that older people are interested in sex, doctors dismiss these conversations with them. There seems to be a connection between physical health and sexual activity, but we don't really know which one comes first. So do people have better sex lives when their health is good, or does their health improve because they're having a good sex life? Well, obviously there's things about blood flow that you have to keep in mind. So, so we don't really know. And, you know, it doesn't really make that much difference. We just know that quality of life can improve with sexual activity. So these are the things that can affect your sex life. And obviously the ones at the beginning will be no surprise to you. As I said earlier, I gave a presentation to folks who were early onset Parkinson, and these folks were in their 40s and 50s. And one of the studies that I read was that a reduced sex life was number 12 on the symptoms that they were complaining about. So there's a lot of things that people with Parkinson's have to endure, but they told me that the thing that helps them in everything they do is a sense of humor. And I think that needs to be brought up here, is that when you have an issue you can laugh about, it sure makes it a lot more comfortable. And so I really learned that from those folks, but also learned other things about choosing the time of day when you have sex, when you have more energy, when your symptoms are less, changing positions. There's so many things that you can be thinking about that go back to the creativity I discussed early on. Incontinence and dementia are two things that are really debilitating to a sex life, because it's difficult to feel sexy with these. And with dementia, I don't think I'm going to have a chance to talk to you about that today, because it looks like we need to be wrapping up. But dementia can have multiple of issues with the couple who are experiencing it. Sometimes people try to continue their sex life as one way of maintaining those connections that they feel they have lost. Other times people say it's really problematic because my husband forgets that we already had sex and I'm just tired, I can't keep doing this. Other times people say, should I even be having sex with a person who no longer knows who I am? And so there's a multiple of issues that go along with that. But let's move to the last and final slide. So this is the way I want to end this, with two major thoughts. Much of what you think about sex and aging comes from what society has told you to think about it, that it's deviant and unacceptable for older people to think about it, let alone engage in it. They make fun of us because we might still be having sex. And we need to help our younger selves and our younger people in our lives to feel comfortable with our sexuality so that they can feel comfortable as they grow older as well. Second, your sex life or intimate relationship does not have to look like anyone else's. You could be totally satisfied with holding hands or back rubs, and that's just okay. But if you want more, pull out the creativity, let loose, and just enjoy yourself. And that's all I got to say about that. So I'm ready for questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Gayle. That was wonderful. We don't have any questions yet in the chat. I do have one, though, that occurred to me just as you were talking at the end there. In the case of a couple, either married or dating, or where their expectations and their desires are not meeting, just here and there. Do you find that people go to counseling for that? I mean, I know that you can go to a physical doctor and get a lot of these issues resolved or treated, but I'm wondering how many people feel comfortable or end up seeking counseling for when they're just not on the same page sexually.
So we're still talking about older adults here, aren't we?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say it doesn't happen nearly enough.
Yeah, that's what
you're right. You're not going to get that kind of counseling from a doctor, and he really wouldn't be the qualified person to ask. And I would recommend, if somebody said that to me, I would recommend that they do see a counselor that they're comfortable with. I am actually the editor for a journal that's coming out next winter on sexuality and aging. And I got to pick the writers for it. And I wanted to make sure that we were reaching the fringes, the people that the researchers aren't talking about. And so I actually wanted to get a porn star. And I know one personally, but I was not able to get her. And she believes that her role now is sex education, and she continues to, she's in her 60s and she continues to make sex videos. You can get a subscription to her online presence. I did get a woman whose mother, when she was old, became a dominatrix. And she had been, she felt that she never had any power with men. And when she realized that she could actually get paid to tie them up, well, she was totally liberated. Well, her daughter was all for her mom's way of life. And so she's going to write an article for us. We have a sex therapist who recommends for people who can't do intercourse, things for outer course. And so she's into sadomasochism and these kind of things. So, things that, I had never thought about, but obviously there's people out there that can help you overcome just about any problem, but finding the right person is probably going to be the issue. Is that a person that both of those people in your hypothetical scenario would be comfortable with is going to take a little bit of searching, because I would say that they both need maybe to make a compromise in terms of the person that doesn't want it might want to explore why they feel that way. And the other person needs to think about am I already getting intimacy from this person in ways that I'm not equating with intimacy? So I don't know if that helps, but that's
Yeah,
a
well,
problem.
I was just thinking, I mean, I'm thinking that's a marriage counselor or somebody who, but whether that, would fall under their I mean, it's very hard to find the right counselor. Sometimes it takes multiple tries. So that would be tricky.
There is a program in Widener University for sexual therapy. So there are people who are specialists in this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a question? Okay.
I guess other than the library, are there resources or websites that you'd recommend in terms of good, like reliable information about this topic?
Oh boy, I should have had a prepared list. Most of my research has been with dementia and sexuality. And so I have a lot of that stuff. I would imagine, even WebMD has some stuff, and you get started on one of these. I would recommend that you look for this New York Times Magazine article, because I think she is very comprehensive and probably gives a lot of citations for it. And that would help you to jump off on other areas.
Great.
Yeah, I put that in the chat along with Maggie Jones's name and the date of it was January 30th, 2022. Is that what you've got, Gayle?
Yeah.
So if people wanted to look it up, I guess we can access on the library's website, Kathleen?
Yes, yeah, the New York Times is available with your library card for free. And so if you go to the resources tab on the website, then you can kind of click your way through it. So yeah, it's a great service.
Yeah. One of our gentlemen attendees says, both of my doctors, my regular internist and my VA doctor, asked at every physical exam, how's your sex life? I assumed every doctor did. But my wife said she has never had a doctor ask, and we have the same internist who happens to be a woman doctor.
That's
so
interesting.
Figure, huh?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah.
I wonder how many people feel comfortable enough reporting whether their doctor has ever asked about sex.
Yeah.
If you, I don't know, well, we don't have enough people's faces visible, but I've never been asked. And
Never.
I have even let my doctors know what my specialty is, but they've never asked me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a question. How often should older women be going to get a well woman checkup, in your opinion?
Well, they don't do pap smears for older women anymore. So if you were having issues with your sex life, you would have to ask for it, I think. A well woman check, I don't think would really help you with your sexual life.
I think they end at 65, don't they? Pap smears around there, 64,
so.
65.
I'm 67. I just had my last one.
Yeah. So here's a tip. Have you heard of Second Act TV? It's a YouTube channel where they talk about sex after 50.
I don't. I hadn't heard about that, but I will certainly look them up. And then I wrote right after that, Joan Price is probably the go-to gal. Remember Dr. Westheimer, Dr. Ruth?
Oh,
yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Joan is kind of her replacement. Joan is quoted a lot in this article, and she's like the queen bee of sex and aging. She doesn't let any of the rest of us forget that, she's first and foremost. So she has written several books. Naked at Our Age is the one that's probably most popular, but she does address many, many issues, and I would recommend reading Joan Price.
Okay. And then I've got a direct message question / comment. What about masturbation as an option?
That is probably one of the things that's going to be addressed in the journal that we're developing. And that is called Generations, put out by the American Society on Aging. It should be out in January of 2023. And it will be online, so y'all have access to it. what can I say? Well, obviously masturbation is available for all of us. And especially if you do not have a partner, there's no reason not to. It's absolutely probably provides many of the benefits that an intimate relationship can provide in terms of health. So increased blood flow and those kind of things.
All right.
Oh, I want to end with something. So before I was a sex person, I was a physical, I don't know, my master's degree was in kinesiology, and I was an exercise nut. Oh, for a while I was director of wellness at a YMCA, and I got invited to talk to a group of bankers, and I told them all this stuff, and that anytime a speaker speaks, you only remember maybe 3 things. And y'all are going to remember the stories I told. You're not going to remember anything else. But here's another story. So I went in, and one of the questions at the end was, what do you think about coffee? And I said, well, I just read an article that coffee drinkers have better sex lives. And after that, every time I went into the bank, they offered me a cup of coffee. So I'm sure if I went back to McPherson, which is where I did that, they'd still ask me about coffee. So if you're wondering, go out and start drinking some coffee and find out if it improves your sex life.
There's your pro tip for the day.
There you go. There you go. What about those of us who can only do decaf anymore?
Yeah.
Where does that leave us?
I don't know.
What about tea? Someone says.
Right.
Well, you're free to experiment all you want.
Okay. And you're right. That is what people remember. That's the takeaway, Gayle. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure everybody appreciates all the information and a really good, fun presentation. We appreciate that. And we hope to see everybody here on the 18th at 4 p.m. to talk about feet. Boy, what a switcheroo.
From
So
sex
have
to
a good,
feet.
what?
I said from sex to feet.
That's right. Why not?
Well,
Okay,
there
everybody.
are foot fetishes.
Oh, that's true. Good
Maybe
point.
there's a crossover there.
All right, everybody, get your pedicures and we'll see you on the 18th then.
Bye. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.